Revit allows us to do what's called group components. Whenever you group a component, that means that you combine different components so that they can all be copied and moved together. To create a group, we first need to select on some items that we want to create a group of. What I'd like to do is create a group of this furniture that we see inside of the room. So I'm going to click somewhere over here, hold my mouse button down, and then just window around these three pieces of furniture. After they've been selected, we'll come up here to Create Group. It'll ask, what name do you want to give this group? And this is important because you may need to reference it later. For the name, I'll call it Bedroom Furniture. Then click on OK. The next thing is if we zoom in here to our group, we can see that there's an X, Y, Z coordinate. I always like to move this XYZ coordinate to a location that I can find, sort of a common location, which means that if I would copy this group from one spot to another spot, I'd always know where my insertion point, this XYZ location, was actually located at. So let's click where that dot is at and then pull it over to the upper corner of the room. That way, if I would ever copy it, I'd always know that this is the insertion point of my group. After placing it there, I can click off of it. And now if we would click where these items are at, we can see that each one of these items is currently inside of this group. Now the advantage of having them inside of the group is that I can now, with it selected, come up here to copy, pick this intersection right here, and then copy this group over. And I can place it anywhere I'd like, including inside of this bigger room over here on the side. And now these are individual instances. If I had a furniture schedule, it would automatically be updating that furniture schedule every time I copied that group from one spot to the next spot with the appropriate furniture on the inside of it. Another thing that I can do with groups, and that's actually one of my favorite features, is if I didn't want this group to actually be right here, I wanted a mirrored version of that group to be over on the other side of the wall. Could I do that? And the answer to that question is yes, I can absolutely mirror this group over to the other side of the wall. What that means is that if I select on the item, I can then go to my mirror command. So I'll come up here, and now I'll mirror draw axis. I'll zoom in here, I'll pick the midpoint of this wall, come straight down like this, and now we can see that it's mirrored that over to the other side. And if I hit escape a couple times on the keyboard, I now have furniture in this location and this location. It's all part of the copied group that I originally made over here at this location. Now, if I wanted to make a change to this group, I can do that too. And when I say if I wanted to make a change, well, if I zoom in here really close, I can see that this piece of furniture is actually overlapping the wall. And it'll be doing that in each of these locations as well. One of the things that I can do is select where that group is located at, zoom in, click Edit Group, click on that piece of furniture, use the Move command, click that point, move it to there, then select Finish. Notice how it automatically updated that piece of furniture over here on this side of the wall. If we zoom back out to take a look at the original group, it's also updated back in the original group. So by grouping your elements, you can copy them from one spot to another, you can move them as a unit from one spot to another, you can mirror them across walls or across units inside of a building. Revit will count each and every one of those as individual pieces of furniture. And if you decide to make a modification inside of that group, that change will reflect in each location that that group exists inside of your Revit model. Not only does Revit allow us to copy a group, it also allows us to insert a group into a project. To insert a group, we come over to the project browser and then scroll down until we find our groups. Click the little plus sign next to groups, click the plus sign next to model. The difference between a detail group and a model group is that a detail group would be a grouping of text and line work. A model group is a grouping of three-dimensional objects. And that's what this bedroom furniture is, a grouping of three-dimensional objects. Now what we can do is select on the bedroom furniture, hold the mouse button down, and then drag that here inside of our drawing environment. Now I can let go of my mouse button, and I will insert that group right into this location by clicking. And I can do that inside of the room as well by coming up here and then clicking, and then hitting the escape key a couple times on the keyboard to get out of the command. So I was able to select on it and just drag that group directly into my project. Also, I can modify these groups now that they've been placed into the project. So with this middle room, I can select on it. I can near it by using that near draw axis command. I'll click. I forgot to delete my original one, so I'll select on the original one. I'll delete that just by clicking on the delete key on the keyboard. Select on this furniture, come up here to move, put the intersection there, and then move it over. So now I have each of my groups put into place, drug in from the project browser from underneath groups and our model groups. Revit allows us to duplicate and change groups. In order to accomplish that, what I like to do is select on one of the existing groups inside of this project. So I'll select on this group over on the right-hand side. Then come over here to Properties, and then click on Edit Type. Then select Duplicate. Now I still want to have a group called Bedroom Furniture, but let's call it Bedroom Furniture 2, and click on OK. Then click on OK one more time. Just by going through that process, we've now created an entirely new group. And we can see that if we come down to the project browser and then look underneath the model, we have both bedroom furniture, which was our original group, as well as our bedroom furniture 2. Now that we have our bedroom furniture 2, what we can do is modify this group so that it looks a little bit different. If you select on it, we can come up here to Edit Group. What I'd like to do is get rid of this furniture dresser. So I'm going to select the dresser and then hit the delete key. Then select on Finish. Right now you'll notice that if I zoom out, it's only affected this model group because this is the only one which is the bedroom furniture 2. If I select on any of the others, you'll see that it's still called bedroom furniture. And now this is where it gets interesting because now that I have a bedroom furniture 2, I can mix and match different furniture arrangements by selecting on an individual group, coming up here to the type selector list, and then picking the other bedroom furniture arrangement off of the list. In this case, I'll select the bedroom furniture 2. Notice how it now has the bedroom furniture 2 arrangement just mirrored over on the other side of the wall. I could do the same thing over here. Select on this group, come up here to the bedroom furniture, and then change it to bedroom furniture 2. If I'd like this one to be bedroom furniture, I could do that. Click on the bedroom furniture 2, click, change that to be bedroom furniture. And I could have multiple different rooms set up this way. This works really well if you're working with hotels or hospitals where you have the exact same repeating room on multiple different floors, multiple different locations. Make each one of those units its own group. Place a bunch of groups in each of those rooms. Then, as needed, select on the group, modify the group if needed, then select on it, come up here to the type selector list, and then as the client makes design decisions, you can just flip in and out the different furniture arrangements into the appropriate spaces. Typically, when you modify a Revit group, that means any of the other groups of the same type will also get modified with the same changes. And that's a good thing. It's one of the main reasons why you use groups. But occasionally you'll have a group that you want to make a change to without ungrouping it, but you also don't want to affect any of the other groups of that type. To accomplish that, we can zoom into that individual group. And in this instance, we can see that we have a group that has a piece of furniture that's almost going through the doorway. We look over here, that's not really an issue because this piece of furniture is away from the door, which is swinging open. But over on the left-hand side, it's probably crossing over where the door's trim is located at and making it more difficult to reach for the door handle. So as a result of that, we either need to get rid of that piece of furniture or just move it to a different location. And we can do that without making a change directly to the group. To accomplish that, we just need to highlight over the piece of furniture that we want to change. Then select the Tab key on the keyboard until that piece of furniture highlights. Select the piece of furniture, then right-click. Then you have two different options. One is called Exclude, and the other is called Move to Project. And what I'd like to do right now is exclude this piece of furniture. If we select on exclude, notice how it goes away? Now it looks like it's went away. In fact, it won't show up in any furniture counts. But if we highlight over that group, we can see the original location where that piece of furniture was originally at. What this means is that if we select back on the group, we'll have the option to restore that group so that that piece of furniture will come back to us. And let's go ahead and go through that process by coming up to the ribbon and selecting on Restore All Excluded. Then just click off of the group. Notice how that piece of furniture is now back and part of the group again. So on a one-off basis, we have the option to remove an individual piece of furniture from the group. It won't actually affect any of the other groups of that type, just inside of that one room. But we also have the ability to move that piece of furniture directly into the model. To accomplish that, we can highlight over the group, click the tab key to select on that piece of furniture, click the piece of furniture, right-click, and then select Move to Project. After selecting on Move to Project, that piece of furniture is no longer inside of the group. You can move it and do whatever you typically would with a piece of furniture inside of your Revit model, which would include using the Move command to move it, or using the arrow keys on your keyboard just to nudge it over so that it's away from that doorway. Then if I click off of it over here, we'll now see that that room arrangement is a little bit better than what it was when it was right next to the door, and it has not automatically updated any of the other rooms that have that same room arrangement because of the group that they're in. So there's two different ways that you can modify a group just inside of a space. Highlight over the group, tab until you've actually selected on that object. And I'll do that over here in the middle one instead because I've already modified it over here. Highlight the group, tab on the object, select it, right-click, and then your two different options are to exclude individual elements from that group in that one spot, or to move that individual object away from the group, put it into the project so that you can make modifications to it within the project environment. Revit has a parts tool, which allows you to divide up your Revit objects into individual parts. Let's zoom into the wall. Right now, this is just one wall drawn from one point to the next point. And if we select on it, it highlights as being one wall. With the wall selected, you can also click on Create Parts, which will then divide that wall up into each of its component layers. If we select off of the wall now, we'll see each individual layer of material associated with that wall. In fact, we could even select on each one of those layers of material, which is each individual part, and then each of those parts could then be scheduled and quantities could be taken from them. Also, if I zoom out, we can see that we have a large floor. We can also apply these properties to floors. If we select on the floor, we can then create parts out of this floor. So come up here and then select on Create Parts. Now it's not as easy to see what's happened with this floor because there's not that many layers of material associated with it. But what you can do with a floor is that maybe this floor is so large that it takes multiple concrete pours in order to pour the entire floor. What we can do now is select on the floor and then come up here to Divide Parts, which will allow us to divide this floor into each of the concrete pours that are required. If we select on Edit Sketch, we can then draw in each of the locations where this floor needs to be divided up for each concrete pour. So I can click once, come straight across, and then click there. I'll hit the Escape key once, and then do that one more time. Click here, come down, and then click in about this location. Then hit the Escape key. Now I'll come up here to the big green check mark, and now this floor has been divided up into 3 different pours. If I select on the green check mark one more time, you can see that it highlights as individual pours, which we can also schedule and get quantities from. Parts can have their own visibility as defined by the view. Currently, we're inside of a 3D view. And if we look at the properties of this 3D view, you can see that our parts visibility is set to Show Parts. That's the reason why we can see the individual parts of the floor as well as this wall. If we would change the Show Parts to be Show Original, it would look like the original 3-dimensional wall and floor that we originally drew. If we change it to be show both, it'll show both the original option as well as the parts. Now let's change this back to show parts. The next thing I want to point out is that if we select on any of these parts, we can control their visibility on a one-by-one basis. So if we would select on this middle portion of the floor, if for whatever reason we wanted to shut off the visibility of just that portion, we could do that by coming down here to the eyeglasses and then hiding the element. And now that portion of the floor we can no longer see. You could also come back down here to the Hide Isolate tool and then reset the temporary Hide Isolate. Then if we would select on that portion of the floor, we could just see that portion of the floor. Come down there to the eyeglasses, the temporary Hide Isolate, isolate the element. Notice how we can now only just see that portion of the floor. And of course, we can bring it back by selecting on the temporary hide isolate icon and then reset temporary hide isolate. But not only do we have that kind of control over something as simple as the floor, but we have that control over every layer that makes up this wall as well. If for some reason we wanted to hide everything that was non-structural inside of this wall, we could do that. Right now, this wall actually only has one structural layer associated with it. And unfortunately, just coming over here to the discipline and turning it to structural is not necessarily enough to hide everything that's not a structural layer. Right now, the reason why we can even see the wall is because show parts is on. But if we would change this from show parts to show original, because the wall currently is not listed as being a structural wall, the entire wall just goes away. Now, if all we wanted to see is the structural elements of the wall, we can do that. Here underneath the parts visibility, change this back to show parts. And now we can select on each part of the wall by just holding down the control key on the keyboard. Now I'm selecting by zooming in. When I see that part highlighting, holding down control and then click on that individual part. I can select on each one of these until I have all the various layers selected except for the structural part of the wall. Now I can come down here to my eyeglasses and then hide those elements. And now the only thing that's left is the structural thickness of that part of the wall. So I can use these show parts tools in order to just see those items on the screen that I want to see. And it's not just individual items that I want to see, such as entire walls. It's the individual parts that make up those walls and those floor assemblies. An assembly in Revit is like a group because anything that you select as being part of that assembly will then be grouped together. You can then find that assembly information underneath the project browser, select it, and then pull it out into your drawing area. And you'll make a copy of everything that's part of the assembly, just like a group, and you can place it anywhere that you need inside of your model. But it's more than just a group. It also allows you to detail out everything that's part of that assembly. To see how that works, let's create an assembly of a staircase that's inside of this building. Let's go to a 01 entry-level floor plan. Then zoom in to the staircase that's near the lounge area. What I'd like to do is window around the staircase and everything in that general area to create an assembly out of it. Click over here, hold the mouse button down, and then just window around everything that I've windowed around. Then let go of your mouse button. Come up here and select on Create Assembly. Now it's going to give us a warning message, and the warning message is saying that not everything that's inside of this selection set can be added to this assembly. The object that can be added to the assembly in this instance is the floor opening, which is cutting an opening in the floor up above, and that's okay with me. Another thing that cannot be added to an assembly are your curtain walls. That's one of those things that I'm hoping that in a future release of Revit they will add, because being able to place curtain walls inside of an assembly would be a really nice feature. Unfortunately, right now you can't do curtain walls, so don't try to select a curtain wall and add them to your assembly. Come down here and click on OK. It'll ask, how do you want to name and group or categorize your assembly? Now, if you come to the naming and category option, click where it has railings, you'll notice that it has every family category that you currently have inside of the assembly. And since our main focus is the staircase, I'm going to select stairs. I can also give this assembly any name that I like it to have, but stairs 001 is okay for this assembly. And I'll click on OK. Right now, it's just like a group. These items are grouped together. I could use the copy command and copy this assembly to another location. So an example of that would be if I had an assembly of the staircase, I might copy that from here up to this staircase location where it's basically the same information. But I also have some extra information available to me as well. And I can find that underneath the project browser if I scroll all the way down to the bottom. Below where we have our groups, there's an option here for assemblies. And if we click the plus sign next to assemblies, we can see that we have the stairs 001 assemblies. Just like with our groups, we can select on this, drag it out into our view, and then place that staircase any place we'd like inside of our model. But that's not what I want to do right now with the stairs 001. If we click on the stairs 001, we can right-click on it and then create assembly views. What this does is allows us to detail everything that's part of our grouping, part of our assembly. You'll notice that we have check marks next to every new view that it'll try to create. We probably don't need to have an elevation view of the underneath side of this assembly. And we probably don't need an elevation view of the above side of this assembly. So I'm going to clear check boxes next to each one of those. But I will automate the process of creating elevation views of each side of our staircase, create a new plan view, create a parts list and a material takeoff, and even create a 3D view of just those items inside of the assembly. Now the scale of each of these views by default will be 1/2 inch equals a foot, but we can change that after the views have been created. I'm going to come down here and select on OK. Each of those views will now be created underneath the assembly. Select the plus sign next to it, we can see each of those views. If I double click where we have the 3D view, 3D ortho, we can see everything inside of the assembly, including the railings, the staircases, and those 2 extra columns that I ended up selecting. To rotate this around, I can either click on the view cube or hold the shift key down on the keyboard and then hold the wheel down on the mouse to rotate it around to see everything inside of the assembly. To look at it in elevation view, such as the front elevation view, I can just go to that detail view, elevation front. Go to the elevation right to see it from the side. We can take a section through this assembly. So if we double click on the detail section B, we can see a section through each of the stairs. Scroll down, we'll find the schedule material takeoff, which is a material takeoff of all the materials inside of the assembly. Double click on the parts list. It'll give us a listing of all the Revit families in that assembly. And it even has a sheet preset up for us that if we double click on it, it would just be a blank sheet, and then we can drag any of these views out onto the sheet to have a highly detailed assembly sheet. This sort of technology is really good if we wanted to do an assembly of a structural column to show how everything actually attaches there at the structural column. We can use it for a wide variety of things, actually. But just remember that your assemblies work a lot like groups. Each of these items are now grouped together. Also, that means we can now select where it has the stairs 01, click on it, and then drag it out into our floor plan view, and then place that assembly anywhere that we require it. So we can have multiple copies of that assembly throughout our project. And finally, these assemblies are really designed for enhanced detailing purposes. It'll automate the creation of views such as section views, detail views, and plan views, and even give you information such as your material takeoffs and your parts list. Just like a group, assemblies can be modified. In this instance, I happen to be inside of the assembly, 3D view, 3D ortho. Now, if I select on those objects inside of the assembly, we can see that we have an Edit Assembly button on the ribbon. If we select on Edit Assembly, we can then either add items to the assembly or remove items from the assembly. If we wanted to add items to the assembly, we would need to go to our regular floor plan view and then select on Add, and then pick all the items that we wanted to add to that assembly. If we just want to remove items from the assembly, we can be inside of this 3D view. Select on Remove, and then pick those items that we want to remove, such as the columns that we have here in the background. As soon as I said remove from the assembly, you'll notice that they went away from this view, and the reason is that they're no longer part of the assembly. Now if we select on Finish, now our assembly no longer has those columns. And if we look in our plan view, those columns no longer show up in plan view. And even in our parts list, those columns no longer show up. So you can add items to an existing assembly, and you can remove items from an existing assembly. And when you do those steps, it'll adjust all the views generated within the assembly itself. There are two different objects in Revit which are very good at providing area and volume calculations. One is considered a room, and the other is considered an area. Let's focus on our rooms. If we zoom into this instruction 115 room, what we can do is highlight over where the room is located at. Click on the room, and then look underneath Properties. When we do that, we'll notice that instruction 115 has an area of 1,374 square feet. As far as its overall volume is concerned, it says that it's not computed. The reason why it's not computed is that there's a calculation button that you can turn on your volume calculations in Revit. And the reason why it's usually off by default is that it takes longer for Revit to compute all the volumes of all the rooms throughout a Revit model. For speed purposes, usually the volume calculations are turned off, but you can turn those on by going up to the Architecture tab and selecting on Room and Area, then clicking on Area and Volume Computations. After selecting on those area and volume computations, we have an option for volume computations, and right now, areas only has a little dot next to it, and it says it's faster, and it is. But if we put the dot next to areas and volumes, it'll now do that volume calculation for us. Click on OK. Give it a few seconds to think about it. Then select on that room again. And you'll now see that we still have the same area, but we now have an overall volume for the space of 13,740.77 cubic feet. Now, this is a very good estimate of just how much room that we have, or how much volume that we have inside of this area. One thing to know, though, is that there is a difference between how a room calculates its volume and how an area calculates its volume. Rooms calculate their volume just to their outside extents, which is usually to the face of the wall. But areas will also calculate volume out to the face of any glass. So because of that, areas are usually better for your more exact calculations, such as your BOMA calculations, while rooms are better if all you care about is just the overall perimeter of the room times the overall height of the room to get your total volume. To generate exact area and volume information, we need to create what's called an area plan. And we can find those area plans by going to the Architecture tab and selecting the little arrow next to Area and then clicking on Area Plan. This will automatically generate an area plan based off of whatever levels you have highlighted, as well as related to the rentable versus gross building types. Now, the gross building type will be all the way around the outside perimeter of your building. Rentable will be all the rentable area or the interior area of your building. I'll stick with a rentable area for this example. Let's just select on the 0-1 entry level, and it'll just create that one floor plan. Click on OK, and it says automatically create area boundary lines associated with all external walls. Yes or no? The key word here being all external walls. It won't automatically create these for your internal walls, just your external ones. Fill it yes. Now we can see if we zoom in that we have these purple lines going all the way around the perimeter of our building. Now it's going around the interior of our building. In fact, if we zoom in here, we can see that we have these lines going to the face of glass. We have lines going to the face of the wall. These are there to help you generate your areas inside of these area plans. To place our areas, we need to have an area plan, and that's what we're currently in. If we look underneath our project browser, we can scroll down, and one of the things we'll find is that we have area plans. And this area plan is for the rentable area, and it's the 0-1 entry level. Area plans actually have their own place underneath the project browser. Now, if we zoom in here where we have our area plan, we can see that we have our area boundary lines surrounding the area plan. Now, I don't exactly understand why this is, but if we zoom in, we'll see that area boundary lines are the only lines in Revit that do not necessarily have to connect with one another. So you can either have them cross over or just miss one another, and they're still good enough to bind those areas between the lines. Now, if I zoom out, we can see that we currently have these area boundary lines all the way around the perimeter, but the inside perimeter of our building. That means that if we try to place an area right now by clicking on area and then selecting on area, it will give us total area for the entire building. So if I click to place this area right now, I can hit the escape key a couple of times, zoom in, and we can see that for this entire first floor of our building, it's 17,399 square feet of area. If we only wanted to know the area of certain portions of the building, we can do that too. But in order to generate those, we need to draw in our area boundary lines. So I need to come up here, select our area boundary. If I wanted to know the exact area of the interior of this space, I then need to draw in where that area needs to be, such as starting at the endpoint of this line, coming across. I could come all the way on across here, or I could stop, come down, draw lines all the way across. I can even come to the face of the glass if I wanted to, then come back up here to the top. And then once I have it exactly where I'd like those lines to be drawn at, I can come back up here to area, select area, and then click to find out the area inside of this room. Now it lists as being 1,554 square feet. And the area down here is now 1,554 square feet smaller than what it was before because it no longer is including this area. So in order to generate exact areas here inside of our area plan, what you'll need to do is select on your area boundary lines and then draw in every location where you want your area to be taken to. Then you can select on area and then place those area objects between the area boundary lines to get your exact area of your floor plan. When preparing a client presentation, we may have the need to add color to our floor plans, which would mean add coloring to the different areas that we place inside of our floor plans so that our clients can visualize where inside of the building their spaces are located. And we can do that with what's called a color fill legend. If we go to the Annotate tab on the ribbon, we can then go over to our Color Fill Legend button and then place the Color Fill Legend somewhere inside of our view. In this case, I'd like to zoom in and then place the legend in right about this location. I'll click once. Now it will create this legend based off of the areas that you've placed inside of this view. In this case, it's all the rentable areas inside of the view. And we can click on OK. What it's done is it's automatically created a green color in every location that I've placed an area. If we zoom in, we can see that there's an area here that's 918 square feet. And then there's another area over here that's 1,103 square feet. And these can both be areas associated with our client. If we zoom out and then zoom in up here, we can see that right now it's listed as being just the building common area. And it's the rentable area legend, and it has the color green. What it's actually trying to say is that in these areas, we have areas placed in, and these are the colors that should be associated with these areas. But we have some other options. For instance, we decide to come in here and then select on the area, click on the area name, and call it Client Office 1. Now just click over here. Zoom out. Come over here, we have area. I'll click again. I'll call it Client Office 2. Now we have two different names, and we can see that the client information is still the same. It's both green in both locations. But if we decide to change the way that this rentable area legend shows its information, it'll show each one of these as its own individual color. So if we select on the rentable area legend, we can come over here to Edit Scheme. After selecting our edit scheme, the color right now is based off of the area type. Click where it has area type, and instead let's call it name. It'll say it's going to change the colors, and that's okay. And now we can see that we have three different areas showing up. If I click on OK to that, notice how we now have the Client Office 1 and Client Office 2, each with their own color. I can zoom out, zoom back in, and here we can see Client Office 1 is a certain color and Client Office 2 is another color. But we have another option that we can do with the legend. I click back on that legend again. Once again, come up here to edit color scheme. If instead of the name, we just want to schedule by the overall area, you can do that as well. We can click on OK. Click on OK one more time. I'll zoom in here. We can see that this is 918 square feet. I'll zoom out. Anything that's green is 918 square feet. Anything that's this blue is 1103 square feet. I can zoom out, zoom back in. There's the 1103. And better yet, if this is a really big plan and it's hard to read this information, I can select here and delete each of these tags. Then I can click the little X over here to close out the warning box. It's just saying that the areas are still there even though the tag has been removed. We know that. But we can now use the color to associate how many square feet is associated in this space. Anybody can just look at the legend, see, oh, area green is 918 square feet, glance over here and know that area green is 918 square feet. So you can use these color fill legends along with our area plans to present some fairly dynamic presentation pieces for our clients to review. An area schedule is the scheduling of all the different areas inside of your building. And we can create an area schedule by going to the View tab on the ribbon, then selecting on Schedules and selecting Schedule/Quantities. Here in the New Schedule dialog box, we need to scroll down until we can find our area schedules. We'll notice that there are actually two different options, one for the gross building and the other for the rentable area. What we have currently in this project is our rentable area, so we want to select the areas rentable. Then click on OK. In the Schedule Properties dialog box, we now need to add to our schedule any of the fields that we want to show on that schedule. That will include our area, name, number, and level. So to select on multiple different categories, we can select on one, hold down the Control key, and then click on the name, the level, and the number, then select on the Add button. Now I'd like to organize these from left to right on the schedule. We'll start by selecting on level and then move that up. We'll come over here to name, move that up, and select on number, and then move that to between level and name. The next thing I'd like to do is come over here to sorting and grouping. What this will allow us to do is arrange the order in which this information will show up on the schedule. So if we select on sorting and grouping, we can come to sort by and click where it has none. Let's start by sorting this by the level. So first floor, second floor, however many floors are inside of the building. Inside of this project, I've only placed areas on our first level, so that's all I really expect to see on the schedule. Now, I'd also like to sort this by the area number. So we'll select on number, then make sure the check mark is next to itemize every instance. It'd probably show every instance anyway because I doubt any of these have the exact same information, but in case they did, they may have grouped those together. So we want to itemize every instance so that we can see every area on our schedule. The next thing I'd like to do is also see what the total square footage for all these areas is. So to accomplish that, we'll come up here to Grand Totals and put a little check mark next to Grand Totals. And I'll leave this at Title, Count, and Totals. Over here in the Formatting tab, select on Area, and put a check mark next to Calculate Totals. That will allow us to add up all those square footage totals. Now if we click on OK, we can see that we have a grand total of 10 different areas, and the area total for those is 17,399 square feet. You can see the names of each of the levels that they're associated with. In this case, it's all level 1. We can see the numbers of each of the areas as well as the name of each of the areas. But we have a unique condition in here, and that's called not placed. And that's number 1 and number 2, and the areas listed as being not placed. What this indicates is that at some point, areas were placed inside the model, and then they were deleted. Now, just because you've deleted an area out of your model does not mean it won't show up on the schedule. In fact, it's still considered part of your model. It just won't total up in your total square footage. So to get rid of these extra areas that we no longer need, you can't just select on an area, click the delete key in the keyboard to get rid of it. What you need to do is also delete it from the schedule. Click where we have this number 1 in the not placed, then select on delete off of the ribbon. It'll say, if you do this, you'll delete this area, and that's okay. So we'll select on OK and do that one more time. Click where it has the not placed, select on delete, OK. Now we can see that we have our numbers 3 all the way down through 10. And the only way that you can adjust that is if you end up renumbering these areas. Oftentimes, you'll just number them 1, 2, 3, 4, clicking inside of each box and renumbering them. For this example, though, I really don't care about the exact order inside of them all that these areas have. So I'm going to click down here at the number 9, and I'm going to change that to be a number 1. Notice how it reorders those? That's because of that sorting and grouping that we set earlier on. And if we change number 10 to be number 2 and then just click somewhere inside of one of these boxes, we can see it resorts these, but we still have the same total overall square footage for our different areas. When you create your schedules, you have options that control the way that the information displays within the schedule itself. One of those options is considered a filter, and we can find our filter underneath Properties by selecting the Edit button next to Filter. Here in the Schedule Properties dialog box, we can see that for this area schedule gross building, we currently do not have a filter. And usually for this kind of schedule, that's not a bad thing. What I'd like to do is create a schedule that only shows the instruction area. In this case, we can see the instruction area is 21,983 square feet. Since I only want to see the instruction area on the schedule, we'll come here to None and then change it to be Name. And the name will need to equal instruction. So in the list over here, we'll click and then select on Instruction. This means that the only thing on the schedule will be any area named Instruction. And some of the other options that we had is instead of equals, we could say does not equal, which means if we wanted to see everything except for instruction, we could do that. And as you can see, we have a wide variety of other ways that we can filter the information inside of our schedule. But for now, we'll leave it at equals. And let's now go to the Sorted and Grouping tab. Here underneath Sorting and Grouping, we can control the order of which this information displays on the schedule. In this case, we can sort by the name of the area or by anything that shows up here inside of the schedule itself. Now, I like sorting it by the name. That means it'll be in alphabetical order. If we had the area numbers, then that would be one of our options, and then we could sort it by the number of the area. Right now, we can see that there's also an option for grand totals. This means it'll provide us with the grand total of square footage for the areas on the schedule. If this checkbox was not checked, then we would not see the grand total 26 and the total square footage of 54,254 square feet. It simply wouldn't show up down below. The next thing I'd like to do, though, is checkmark Itemize Every Instance. By selecting Itemize Every Instance, we'll see every area which is considered instruction. Now, if we come over here to OK, we can now see we've itemized every instance of instruction, and we only see those areas named instruction. You can see the individual square footage for each of these instruction areas, as well as the grand total of square footage for everything labeled instruction. When a schedule is put on a sheet, we can see that the appearance is usually fairly plain. So we can adjust the way that the appearance of these schedules print and display here on the Revit sheets. Underneath the project browser, we need to start by selecting on whichever schedule we want to adjust its appearance. Let's start by selecting on the Area Schedule Gross Building from under the project browser. Then select on Edit next to Formatting underneath Properties. After clicking on Edit, we can see that here underneath the Formatting tab, we have options as far as the text alignment is concerned. Do we want the text to be horizontal or vertical, as well as the alignment of left, center, or right? In this example, I'd like to have the name be over on the right-hand side, and then the area field to be over on the left-hand side. This will line each of these up. If you select on OK, notice how it's now moved the name information over to the right-hand side, and now the area is still over on the left-hand side. So underneath formatting, you can adjust the way that the text displays. Underneath appearance, select on edit next to appearance. We can control the way that the lines around the schedule display, such as do we want to see grid lines? In this case, we do, and they're currently showing up as being thin lines. Well, let's change that to be wide lines. We can also adjust the way that the text looks inside of the schedule. That includes the headers, the title, and then the body of the text. Now, the body text, I think that I'll leave that as it currently is. But for the header text, I'm going to click where it has the schedule default and then change that to be quarter material. Same thing for the title text. Now, realistically, for the header text, I usually leave it the same as the body text, but I want to show you the difference here in the schedule. Now we'll click on OK. Notice how the text is much larger now. And if we zoom in, we'll see if this line weight is actually any thicker. Right now, I'm not seeing the line weight being any thicker, but that's because underneath my View tab, I have thin lines turned on. If I turn my thin lines off, notice how we now have a wide line going all the way around the perimeter of the schedule as opposed to the way that it looked before, which was the same line weight as the schedule over on the right-hand side. Now, unfortunately, because this text is now larger, it's also going off of the schedule. So to adjust that, what we need to do is select on the schedule here, move it over, click on the schedule over here, and then we get some arrows. If we click where that arrow is at and we can pull this out, we can make the overall width of the schedule wider. So I'll continue to pull that out until I can see the entire schedule name, in this case, area schedule, gross building. But now that I've pulled it out, I really don't like the way that the square footage looks. Shifted all the way over here to the left-hand side, and the instruction, I really don't like it over to the right. So we can adjust it again. Now, just selecting on the schedule isn't going to allow you to adjust it. You can come over here to the project browser, select where you have the name of the schedule, scroll down, then come in here to formatting and click on the edit button. For the name, I'd like to center the name. For area, I'll do the same thing. I'll just center the area information. Then click on OK. Now we can see that it's centered underneath the appropriate headings. One last thing I'd like to do is over here on this area schedule random, I'd like to change its information so that it no longer has level associated with it. Come over here, click on the area schedule random, come up to formatting and select on the edit button. Next, make sure that level is highlighted, and then let's make level a hidden field. This means that level can still be used for such things as filters or sorting and grouping, but it will no longer show up on the schedule. If we click on OK, now we can see that this area schedule is now smaller than what it was because it no longer has that level as part of the schedule here on our sheets. Revit allows us to calculate the totals of the different objects in the Revit model. Now, when we say calculate totals, that could be how many of a certain object are there, or what would the total cost of all those objects be? What I'd like to do is set up a special door schedule, which will allow us to get the quantity of the doors in the entire project, as well as what the estimated cost of those doors would be. So to set up that schedule underneath the project browser, select on Door Schedule, right-click, and then come up here to Duplicate View, and then click on Duplicate. Now, in this new schedule that we just created called Door Schedule Copy 1, I'd like to rename it. So let's select on the Copy 1, right-click, and go to Rename. Let's get rid of the Copy 1, and I'm just going to type in quant or quantities, and click on OK. Now, the next thing that we need to do is just format this schedule so it shows information such as cost and gets rid of some of the unnecessary information. To achieve that, underneath Properties, we'll select on Edit next to the word Fields. From here, we need to find Cost, and then add that to our schedule. Here we have the Sorting and Grouping tab. What I'd like to do is rearrange the way that this does sorting and grouping, because I really don't want to sort and group by the mark number anymore. What I'd like to sort and group by would be by the overall width and then by the overall height of these doors. Also, I'm going to put a footer underneath width. And what this is going to allow us to do is see how many of this kind of door falls into this category. Make sure there's a check mark next to grand totals, If there's no check mark next to grand totals, we won't be able to see the grand total for our cost information associated with our doors. Also, verify that Itemize Every Instance does not have a check mark next to it. If there's a check mark next to it, it means it'll show every single door in the project, and that's not what we want. We just want to group together all those doors with similar properties. Then go to the Formatting tab, where it has Cost, select on Cost, and then put a check mark next to Calculate Totals. That's important because even though underneath sorting and grouping, we're telling it to give us the grand total, it won't know what to give it the grand total of unless we put a check mark next to it. In this case, give us the grand total for cost. When you're done with those steps, click on OK. Notice how now we can see that we have 92 doors of a certain width and height, and their overall cost is $10,213 for this category of door. We can see that we have 3, which are 5'8", 6, which are 6 foot, and 4, which are 6'8", for a grand total of 105 doors, with their total cost being $13,890. And the door prices that I put in there are fairly low door prices. I just did it for easy math so that we could see it. But the reason why we're getting these quantities is because here underneath sorting and grouping, we made sure that there's a check mark next to grand totals. We're getting these totals underneath these groupings, such as the 3 foot and 7 foot, because of the check mark next to footer. And we're getting the grand total for the cost because when we select it on cost, we put a check mark next to Calculate Totals. A sheet list is very much like a table of contents in a book. When you have a sheet list created, you usually include it in the set to make things easier to find inside of your set of construction documents. In the sheet list, you'll see a listing of every sheet and the information associated with those sheets. Also, you'll get to see the order of which those sheets are included in your set of construction documents. To create a sheet list, you first need to go to the View tab, then select on Schedules, then click Sheet List. Underneath our sheet list properties, I'd like to add 3 of these available fields over to our scheduled fields. The first piece of information I'd like to add is the sheet number. Then I'd also like to add the sheet name. And I think I'll add the current revision. Select on Current Revision and then click Add. Now I'd like to put these in a certain order as well. Now, unfortunately, the order that I'd like to place these in is not a kind of ordering that our sorting and grouping can just do by alphabetical order. I want to have the letter G be first, then the letter A. Then we have some other letters, and they won't be in alphabetical order either. So to put those in the order that we require, we need to add a new parameter. Let's click on the Add Parameter button. And let's just call this new parameter sorting. For the type of parameter that it is, change it to a text parameter. By changing it to text, it means that we can type in either a number or a letter in order to put these in a specific order. It will be a project parameter. Let's just move down here and click on OK. Now we can see that sorting is one of the parameters that will be available to us here inside of our new schedule, which is a sheet list. Now we need to sort our schedule by this sorting parameter. Let's go to Sorting and Grouping, and then for Sort By, select Sorting. Next, make sure that Itemize Every Instance has a check mark next to it. That means that we'll see every sheet. Then when we have the word None next to this Then By, let's change that so that it has the sheet number. What this means is that it'll sort by the original information that we put underneath sorting. Then after that, it'll sort by the sheet number itself. Click on OK. Now it's automatically created this sheet list. Now, unfortunately for us, though, where we have the sheet number, we can see that even though it's in alphabetical order as well as numerical order, we have such things as this G001 right in the middle. And I'd like the G001 to be up at the top of the list. That's the reason why we created our sorting parameter. So over here underneath sorting, just put in the number 1 and then click inside of any of these other cells. When you do that, you'll see that number 1 automatically goes to the bottom of the list. And that's because whenever you're sorting, it'll put all the blanks up at the top and anything with a numerical sequence down at the bottom. So what we need to do now is start to put numbers in next to each of the A's, each of the E's, all the way on down the list. So for our A's, I'd like to put in the number 2. So just put in the number 2, click inside of another cell. Make sure in this case that that next cell is next to A201. Put in the number 2, click inside of a cell, come up here to the top again, put the number 2 in next to A401. Now the next thing I'd like on the list will be our structural drawings. Since that's going to be after the architectural, that needs to be a number 3. So I'm going to come down here to the S201, click, put the number 3 in, then click inside of the cell for S101, put the number 3 in next to that S101. Then I'm going to click inside of the cell for this E101. Basically, I'm starting to click inside the cells where I know that I'm going to place my next number. For E101, this will be a number 4. Then I'll click up here and make sure that I'm inside of the cell for E201. Put number 4. Those of the M's will be number 5, and then the P will be a number 6. After you've completed putting those numbers in, you'll now notice that your sheet numbers are in the correct order, based off of the number associated with sorting, as well as the alphabetical and numerical order associated with the sheet number. I really don't need to see this sorting inside of our schedule when it's placed out onto our sheet. So to hide sorting, what we need to do is come over here to our D column and then highlight this D column. Then come up here to hide and select on hide. Notice how it hides it? By the way, if we need to get it back, we can always just select on unhide all and it will bring that column back. But we can always hide it again when it's time to place it onto a sheet. But now that we have this sheet list in place, the next thing I'd like to do is place it out here on our G001 cover sheet. So to accomplish that, I'm going to double click on the G001 cover sheet, scroll up, expand out our schedules, and what I'd like to do is find that sheet list. When we find the sheet list, click on it, drag it out here, click the place it here on the sheet. If we zoom in, we can see that right now, this is probably the way that we'd actually like it to be displayed. But if we wanted these columns to be a little bit wider so that we don't have the double lines of sheet number, sheet name, and current revision, all we would need to do at this point is just select on the arrows, pull those out until it actually expands out so that it's only on one line.